Neurology and mental health, they're two different conditions. Mental health has a lot of things to look after. We have depression, we have anxiety, we have bipolar disorders, we have ADHD, we have schizophrenia.
How do genes influence nutrient effect on brain health?
Our brain is made up of fat as well. If there is variation in this gene, there is higher risk of developing Alzheimer's. Nutrigenomic testing is a lifetime testing. You don't have to do it like a laboratory testing again and again.
Do you think the woman during pregnancy period, when she eat a food that contain a lot of additive, do you think this food additive affect the gene?
That is the reason we say that during the pregnancy you need to eat healthy foods which are, nourishing and supporting and giving all your needs. So nowadays people are getting cancers because they don't know, they're not prescribing, they're not getting it prescribed through a dietitian. They just follow social media, they don't follow proper people and then land up into various problems. But yes, nutrigenomics or diet does play a very important role in mental health conditions. At the end of the day, what do? They reduce the good bacteria and they increase the bad bacteria.
Can nutrigenomic delay aging?
If you expose yourself to alcohol, if you expose your body to smoking, what exactly happens? Your aging speeds up. Aging just extends. And how do you get it back?
Elikia, how do genes affect our risk for obesity?
We don't gain weight like in US and America and all. If they're obese, the entire body is obese. The hands are there, then the legs are there, the entire body. But if an Indian, if you see, it's only the stomach, the central obesity that is seen. So they say it's because of the thrifty gene hypothesis.
Hi everyone, I am Dr. Burhan. Welcome to my broadcast. Our topic for today's broadcast is about nutrigenomic and neurological. Through this broadcast, we will discuss what is the relationship and how the nutrigenomic impact the neurological condition or disease. Today, we have a very beautiful dietitian from Goa, Elikia. Welcome, Elikia. Can you tell us about yourself?
Firstly, thank you, Burhan, for having me here.
You're welcome.
Yes. So my name is Elikia Uskaikar and I'm basically from Goa. So I've done my graduation in food nutrition and dietetics from Ivas College, affiliated under Mangalore University. And right now I'm pursuing my master's, a second year student in nutrition and dietetics, and I'm specializing in nutrigenomics.
You must welcome today Elikia to our broadcast. Elikia, today's topic is about nutrigenomic and neurological. Can you tell us a brief explanation about what is nutrigenomic?
Yes, firstly, thank you so much, Burhan, for having me here. And when it comes to nutrigenomics, as the word says, nutri and genomics. So basically, we study the effect of diet or nutrition on the mutations or how the diet can affect the response to gene. So nutrigenomics is not something that has just come up, but in India, yes, it's a new field for us to explore, but there are various studies which is happening in Europe and the field is just booming, and even in places like US and all, nutrigenomics has a variety of scope. So with nutrigenomics comes something as the precision medicine. So people think that nutrigenomics and precision medicine, they go hand in hand, but personalized medicine or personalized diet is something different. So basically nutrigenomics is nothing but how genes affect, we learn how genes affect and the response towards it due to various factors. We also have epigenetic factors. So now we have diet effects on the gene, we study about it. In the same way, we have epigenetics. So how stress, the environment, and the external factors affect on the gene. So together we have all the broad classification, which is called as nutrigenomics.
Okay, Elikia, we come now to the second question, which is about what is the neurological. Can you tell us a brief explanation for our audience about neurological?
Yes. So neurology, as the word says, neuro means we try to talk about the nervous system. So basically the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. So because of, various conditions that occur, it could lead to conditions like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, say autism. So autism also has like autism spectrum disorder,
Yes.
multiple sclerosis. So there are a variety of conditions that are like falling into neurology. So neurogenomics is a part of nutrigenetics or nutrigenomics.
Nitrogen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Neurogenomics is a part or maybe a subdivision somewhere in the omics studies. They speak about neurogenomics. So it's a part of nutrigenomics. But basically speaking about, they also mention that neurogenomics, now it's very controversial here because I just attended a conference from the International Society of Nutrigenomics and Nutrigenetics. So they say that neurogenomics doesn't fall into nutrigenomics, but it falls into nutrigenetics and other things. So various people, they have different observations towards it. But when it comes to neurogenomics, I would say it's like an integrate play between neurology and certain conditions maybe we can look into, because brain is very complex and the mind is very complex, and it's very difficult for us to understand how, because see, when it comes to other body parts, we can understand what is happening because we know the physiology behind it. Even when it comes to brain, we know the physiology, but we exactly cannot detect at a certain point. So the reason they say why not putting neurogenomics into nutrigenomics is because it's not only the diet or the food that could play a role directly, it could be other factors as well. Like for example, stress, it could be exposure to certain
Could be the
chemicals.
environmental factors.
Yes, the environmental factors. It could be genetics also. For example, I have autism. It runs in my family. Then somebody could be autistic. Or there's another recent study, like I wouldn't say more recent, but observational study, and there are many studies where they speak about autism as one of the factors. Where if the mother, she is hypothyroidic, like if she has hypothyroidism, then the child turns out to be autistic. So as I said, it's a very complex field and we all are learning about it. So yes, that's what.
Okay, very nice, Elikia. And Elikia, what is the nutrogenomics effect on the neurological condition? Or what is the impact of nutrogenomic on the neurological condition?
Okay, coming to nutrigenomics, now we have a gene called as the MTHFR, which is responsible for the DNA methylation, basically for the folate metabolism. So if this gene is absent, then the folate metabolism, or there is some related things with the folate. But now this thing does not occur is because of the variation in this gene, because of the SNPs. Now SNP is nothing but, it's called a single nucleotide polymorphism. So when we look at the DNA, we have sequences. Like we know in the DNA, we have 4 base pairs. We have A, which binds with T. We have G, which binds with C. And one wrong binding wouldn't make much difference, but other bindings would make over here. So I feel that especially when it comes to neurogenomics and nutrigenomics, if there are mutations in the MTHFR, which is very much important for DNA methylation, as they say, because if the DNA is hypermethylated or hypomethylated, then this is seen in conditions like autism also, where the brain development of the child is very lesser because of the gene which is not capable to do its work.
Elikia, there is a question which is very important to me. I think it's also important to our audience. How do genes influence nutrient effect on brain health?
Okay. So when it comes to genes, we have certain genes which could be like, it affects the brain health, as you said, or the neuronal health. So first is a gene, like there are various genes, there are multiple genes. But if we look at specific genes, we have ApoE, which is apolipoprotein E. Now there are variants to this E, like E2, E4. So these, if there is variation in this gene, so they say that there is higher risk of developing Alzheimer's. So what exactly is apolipoprotein? If like we don't know what is apolipoprotein. Apolipoprotein is a kind of lipid or fat. So if this accumulates in the body, then there is higher levels of cholesterol that is accumulated. Higher levels of cholesterol can also lead to cardiovascular conditions like developing heart attacks, or maybe a development of plagues in the heart, or the arteries or the veins are basically blocked. Apart from that, we also know that a brain is made up of fat as well. So if there is higher circulating amount of apolipoprotein, then it can cause conditions like Alzheimer's also. And depending upon the nutrients, if we see, there are different nutrients. There are nutrients like omega 3s that are given, omega 6 is given. The ratio and the balance between both the nutrients is very necessary, because each gene, like if I have a mutated gene and the balance is not given properly, so upon doing a nutrigenomic test, I come to know where exactly do I stand and what variation I have. Do I have a mutated gene towards something? And the mutation will not occur like all of a sudden. The mutation, I will have those mutated genes by birth, and that's the reason we say nutrigenomic testing is a lifetime testing. You don't have to do it like a laboratory testing again and again. And yes, to confirm them, then later on there are other nutrients as well, like we have the B vitamins, which they act as cofactors in various pathways also. Like if we have elevated levels of methionine, homocysteine, sorry, elevated levels of homocysteine has occurs because we don't have this MTHFR gene again. So homocysteine gets converted into methionine. So if this gene is not present, so how will the homocysteine get converted into methionine?
Right.
Right. So hence we need to understand the condition well, because we cannot just come to a conclusion. But coming to the nutrients, there are many nutrients that are given for brain health. There are also peptides that are given for autistic people, because people who have autism, they have, as I mentioned, they have a lot of DNA methylation that occurs. So peptides are given. They are like supplements that are given. So because even in the gut, they have a lot of problems. And coming to the genes also, there's another concept that they mention, that if the gut is unhealthy, then the gut-brain axis doesn't really occur. So even that could be one of the contributing factors, because the absorption of all these nutrients like B vitamins, omega 3 does not occur properly.
Elikia, as dietitian and specialist in nutrigenomic, can nutrigenomic guide diet for mental health?
So yes, I can really answer that question. So we need to know that when it comes to something with neurology and mental health, they are two different conditions. Mental health has a lot of things to look after. We have depression, we have anxiety, we have bipolar disorders, we have ADHD, we have schizophrenia. So certain could be, both of these things could be interrelated. Few, something like depression, which you develop over time, but there are also like panels where they say that you have a risk of developing depression because you have a variant in this gene, that gene. So accordingly, yes, when it comes to mental health and how can we help, first and main thing is improve the gut brain axis. So how do you improve the gut brain axis? You give a lot of probiotic rich foods, prebiotic rich foods. Basically, we have something called as the synbiotics. So which is
mixed
of
probiotic
both.
and prebiotic.
Exactly, yeah,
Yes.
mixed of both. We have probiotics as well as prebiotics. Now, they have something that's called as the synbiotics. We have also called as the psychobiotics. So which is given to people say, for example, I have depression and I am taking clinically, they have this term severe clinical depression. So I'm clinically diagnosed with depression, or I have depression. So there are certain medications that are given and certain things that I've given, but the gut of the person usually is disrupted. So then diet plays a very important role, where we stimulate the vagus nerve, and then the person feels better. And then we have other things when it comes to the gut brain axis, where we give probiotics, and then it also helps in a lot of mood disorders, preventing mood disorders, or managing the mood. So there are so many things. Apart from that, there are also neurotransmitters. So we know we have for happy, like we have other neurotransmitters. We have serotonin, we have oxytocin. So several neurotransmitters. So what actually is the precursor for this? So for serotonin, we have tryptophan. Say the trip gene is not working properly in me. How do I know it? I know it after maybe a test. If I do that, the metabolism of tryptophan cannot occur because I don't have the gene. Or maybe the gene is there with me, but it is mutated. Or say the mutated gene which is there, it's not working because of some reasons. I come to know if I am able to metabolize tryptophan, or able to break tryptophan down so that I give food for serotonin, so that there is production for serotonin. If this thing occurs, then it's a good thing. So there are so many aspects towards it, and as I said, it's a vast field to explore and to learn. But yes, nutrigenomics or diet does play a very important role in mental health conditions. Like they also say to reduce all the junk food, reduce the fats, reduce the trans fats basically, because at the end of the day, what do? They reduce the good bacteria and they increase the bad bacteria. So I guess there are many shows also that have come on Netflix also. There's a show called as Hack Your Health, or something related to gut health. I cannot remember the name now, but they have actually performed studies where they do the fecal transplant. Like, for example, I have depression, fecal transplant. So I have a certain strain of bacteria, so which can contribute to depression. So if that fecal transplant was done, because it was done between a brother and a sister. So sister had issues related to gut. So her gut was not that good because she had the amount of good bacteria was less because of all these things that we nowadays we take. We take antibiotics simply. We take without the prescription of the doctor. We take antibiotics, and then the gut bacteria is destroyed. So then she had to undergo a stool transplant. Like she took the fecal transplant from her own brother. So the other gut issues were solved. Her IBS came down and all the other things were solved. But then she experienced something called as depression. Because her brother had depression, she got depression. Yes, that's because then when they studied later, they came to know that the bacteria, the certain strains that were correlated when it comes to, having risk of depression, were now into her microbiome because she had the bacteria because it was transplanted. So yes, nutrients and mental health really go hand in hand, and the field is just rising, and we are just getting to know so many things over time.
Elikia, I have two questions, which is related to what you spoke about now. One of the questions is about antibiotic and probiotic. Some doctors or physicians prescribe probiotic to treat the diarrhea that associated with the antibiotic. Can the patient or client use probiotic and antibiotic together in same time?
Okay, so Burhan, when it comes to like the probiotic and the antibiotic together, answering to your question, first we need to understand what condition is it. Like what? Because antibiotics also, they have broad spectrum antibiotics and so many kinds of antibiotics. Antibiotics that are used to treat pneumonia might be different rather than antibiotics, which is given to treat something else. Now, as you mentioned, antibiotic related, associated diarrhea, which happens, the probiotics that are given to treat. which is basically Lactobacillus rhamnosus. GG is one of the strain that is given. So it depends. Now, it depends upon the course of antibiotics that is given. For example, the course is of how many days. Usually why the physicians give is because as I said, the bacteria just wipes off, be it good or be it bad. So at that time, like when you are taking an antibiotic, no, at that moment, but later on, because at the end of the day, what it's going to do, it's not going to have any effect. You take the antibiotic together, you take the probiotic, so it's basically killing everything. So when it comes to such things, and even when the physician gives, you have to be very careful, because he'll tell you at a particular time, only then you have to take it. So there in probiotics also they give you Repsules, which are, it's like a liquid. I mean the Repsule, which is more effective, they give you in the form of spores. And once your antibiotic course is done, they tell you to continue the probiotic because there is production and the balance is maintained. So that could be also one of the things. So it depends. But yes, you have to give it to the patient. The timing might depend from person to person, depending upon the condition. But according to me, yes, it has to be given.
Okay, Alikia, the second question is that you mentioned autism. And it's very important to me because in our country there are more condition of autism, and it's increased year by year. What do you think about autism? Do you think it's like something genetic or something related to food or environment? Do you think the woman during pregnancy period, when she eat a food that contain a lot of food additive, do you think this food additive affect the gene and cause the autism in the other generation?
So when it comes to, you're basically asking only the food additive, right?
Not just food additive, any other factor like
any other epigenetic factors, basically you mean to say. So there are several genes that contribute to autism. The SHANK, there's a gene called as SHANK, SHANK. So that could be one of it, or that could be any of the diseases. I mean, any of the genes. SHANK is one of the gene, and that could be any of the genes that could contribute. Or maybe in your country, they have this mutation occurring in one particular gene. But basically, when it comes to autism, there are many factors because it's a neuronal development. So as you mentioned, if we are having highly processed foods and foods which are rich in additives, we know that whatever we eat through the placenta, it reaches the baby when the woman is pregnant. So through the placenta, absolutely additives might occur, because nowadays microplastics are also reaching the placenta and can be seen in newborn babies. So additives is not a really big thing that could affect, because the brain development is very fragile at that moment. The brain requires a lot of conditions. It just takes from the placenta, irrespective of knowing whether it is good or it's bad. Like how our brain has something called as the blood-brain barrier, does not allow all the things to enter. Placenta really does not know what is good and what is bad. So it depends upon the pregnant woman who is having foods. That is the reason we say that during the pregnancy you need to eat healthy foods which are nourishing and supporting and giving all your needs. Fulfilling all your needs. Apart from that, there are various factors. There is stress. There is like my study which I'm doing is basically autism spectrum disorder and L-carnitine deficiency. So you might be seeing people with autism. They are given the supplements called as carnitine. So L-carnitine, yes. And apart from that is also if there is mitochondrial dysfunction. Now, what is mitochondria? We have all studied in school that mitochondria is nothing but the powerhouse of the cell. So to get energy, we have that small thing in the cell called as mitochondria. So the more number of mitochondria, more energy we have. But what happens is because of all of these unhealthy lifestyle, there's a lot of dysfunction, a lot of mitochondria which just is not working efficiently, or maybe not up to the mark. So during that thing, there could be various conditions then that could be because, as the gene I mentioned, the shank, the gene, or there are other genes as well. So it is again multi approachable. Like, it's multi-dimensional. There are many factors to it. We have to sit and address what would be the reason of you getting autistic child versus what would be the reason of somebody else getting the autistic child, would be two different things. So we need to see that, and as well we need to understand the person's condition. I also mentioned about hypothyroidism. If the woman is hypothyroidic, usually if our thyroid is high, hyper, we try to bring it between the limit. But usually if it is below the limit, we think it's okay, it will come back to normal. But no, there are many complex pathways and complex things that go into that. So I guess we have to sit and we have to see what could be what could be the contributing factors.
Very good, Elikia. Elikia, there is one more question coming to my mind just now. It's about folic acid. Did you think folic acid causes autism? Because I read in one research, I think, or two research, that folic acid may cause autism. Did you think, as a dietitian and specialist in nutrigenomics, folic acid causes autism?
So when it comes to folic acid, now what is the pivotal role of folic acid? Folic acid is used for neuronal health and cognitive function, but there's a limit to it. Everything has to be in moderation. That is the reason we learn about why do we have quantities, right? Otherwise, if any doctor or any nutritionist or anybody who's prescribing, they wouldn't have standards to it. They would have just given any amount or any dosage. Yes, it does contribute. That is the reason it occurs when you have extra.
Extra dose.
So from where this folate comes, the sources we know of folate: green leaf vegetables, a lot of meat products, the red meat. So we get a lot of folate from there. If in your country they consume a lot of red meat, say sheep or
and
mutton,
take supplement also.
yes, so that's when it becomes toxic and it reaches to a state of toxicity. And not only autism, folic acid more of folate can cause cancers also. So nowadays people are getting cancers because they don't know, they're not prescribing, they're not getting it prescribed through a dietitian. They just follow social media, they don't follow proper people, and then they land up into various problems. So I would suggest that you really need to get the supplements from a person who is really an expert, who knows about nutrition, who knows about diet. Now on social media, we also have people who are nutritionists. They call themselves as nutritionists, but they really don't know what nutrition is about. They just do a certificate course for 3 months, 2 months, and they feel it's done. But they don't have the basics. They basically don't know what a carbohydrate is, what are the other names of the carbohydrate, or what are the other things. So yes, it does change also. There are certain recommendations, just I would like to add, when it comes to certain recommendations. For example, you might be knowing the company Coca-Cola, right? So Coca-Cola in USA, while making Coca-Cola uses high fructose corn syrup or high fructose syrup for making. But the same Coca-Cola company, when it produces a bottle of Coca-Cola in Mexico, doesn't use high fructose corn syrup, uses sugar. So why is it different? The brand is the same, the company is the same, right? But the recommendations are different. So US has another set of recommendations, Mexico has another set of recommendations. So it really matters according to the laws that have been set up, according to, which country we fall under, how we have it. If when it comes to your folate also, if they have laws and if they have rules that are made, that we are not giving folate supplement just like that without a doctor's prescription and without maybe a dietitian's prescription, because certain certain supplements in UK, US are not given to the patients just because they take over the counter and then they develop certain conditions. So there has to be somebody who prescribes it. So that is the reason you need to go to somebody who will guide you with it.
Very good explanation, Elikia.
Yes, thank
well
you.
done. Now we coming to next question.
Yes.
What is the gene nutrient link in neurotransmitter regulation?
So the genes. Now genes do affect the nutrient absorption of different different neurotransmitters. So now, what are neurotransmitters? Neurotransmitters, we have different kinds. People nowadays say serotonin, you have to boost your serotonin, you have to boost your dopamine. So these are called as these are the neurotransmitters, the serotonin, the dopamine, acetylcholine. There are many neurotransmitters if you go to see. Serotonin, if the gene which is responsible for converting tryptophan to serotonin does not occur, so then there are fluctuations that are seen in the serotonin levels. Even when it comes to dopamine. Now, the precursor for dopamine is phenylalanine, which gets converted into tyrosine, and tyrosine, gets converted into dopamine. Now, can you imagine where this conversion does not occur? So, say in the inborn errors of metabolism, like, phenylalanine is converted into tyrosine, and then tyrosine, the conversion is not happening is because of the enzyme which is absent. So, people who have phenylketonuria, basically. So, basically, you say that people who have phenylketonuria are always not happy because they don't have dopamine in them. So, then you give the tyrosine rich foods. So genes do play a very important role because the neurotransmitters, they are addressed to do a particular thing. We have something called as the norepinephrine and the epinephrine. Now these neurotransmitters are there for stress. So for example, if I see a snake here, there's some stress which is, adrenaline rush that I get, and due to which I respond in a certain way. But certain people, they get stressed for everything. Even such a small thing, they get stressed. They say they can't handle stress, but the other people can handle stress to a very greater extent or to whatever levels it is. So it all depends upon how the genes are. Is it mutated or not? Does it have a variant in it or not? So neurotransmitters and genes, yes, it is very much related, because if there is a mutation in the gene, or if the gene is mutated, and if it is not, for example, when it comes to dopamine, we have something called as the DRD2 receptors. So if you don't have that receptors, if you don't have that gene, so we need to understand what to give you so that you feel that. No matter that person comes, say a small child comes first in the class, he'll never be happy because he does not have that chemical rush only. So we as dietitians come into picture here, where we need to understand what exactly has to be given. We need to understand the conditions. And yes, when it comes to neurotransmitters, because serotonin is very important. If there's a mutation in the gene when it comes to, say, a serotonin, because of the tryptophan, there's mutation in tryptophan, then the serotonin will not be released or will not perform action. The person might have mood disorders. Person cannot get sleep. So there are various things that we need to see and we need to address so that the neurotransmission occurs properly. There are certain places where we need to really understand what could be the cofactors. For example, pyridoxine is also one of the nutrient which helps a lot in one of the neurotransmitters. We have GABA, which we know that it's important for our brain function. So there are a lot of things and a lot of nutrients. Nutrigenomics is that one part. I feel that we have gone more deeper. Like, I feel there's this, there's this doctors first see us externally, and then, they give a symptomatic approach. You have a cold, they give you a symptomatic approach. Dietitians, they give you food, looking at what, so that you don't go to the doctor falling sick unless and until it's like a very medical emergency. And nutrigenomics, when we come about nutrigenomics, we go into more detail where we learn about the cell, the health of the cell, the number of mitochondria. There are various things if you go to see. So that's how gene does interact with the nutrients, and yes, it does play a very important role.
I think I have a good gene because I am always happy.
Yes.
Serotonin. Okay, Alikia.
And answering to that,
Yes.
They say that they classify, they say the world's happiest country is Finland. So yes, as you mentioned, maybe they also have, genes.
Genes are very good genes.
Exactly, which have DRD2, maybe dopamine and all of these things. Because of that, which maybe they are very happy.
Yeah. Okay, Alikia. Alikia, can nutrigenomic help to prevent chronic disease?
Yes, nutrigenomics can be used to prevent chronic diseases because chronic diseases could be arthritis, could be maybe related to neurogenomics. It could be anything. We need to understand because if nutrigenomic testing is done early in life and we know what would be the risk, I will have the things with me well in advance saying that this thing runs in my family, my genes are mutated, or I might have a risk. So if you see a nutrigenomic report, various companies and various labs, they have their different way, but they tell you whether if you are on a high risk, moderate risk, or low risk. And a few people give you numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, based on the risk. So it differs from person to person. But yes, coming back to your condition, nutrigenomics does help you with various chronic conditions where the person can take preventive measures and can also help to reduce a lot of things in future.
Alikia, as dietitian, did you recommend nutrigenomic or gene test for the people?
Yeah. So as
And why it's important? Can
Okay.
you explain that?
Yes. So this is like I would say when you do a nutrigenomic testing, we just know what is there. We cannot change anything. We cannot go and change our genes or sit with something changing our genes. We cannot do that. It's there with us. We have to accept the reality, whatever is there, and we have to move forward with it.
But maybe can prevent some disease in future.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So that's what. So if we know, we can't do anything. For example, I know I have a problem with my MTHFR gene, which is responsible for folate metabolism, because maybe my folate levels, no matter how much folate I take, the MTHFR gene is not working. So then what do I do? Then what options do I look after, or what do I do? So it really depends on what exactly, is mutated or what. So yes, it does help, as you mentioned. So we need to see when it comes from place to place. I mean, when it comes to different things, how the mutation can occur and how can we prevent it in the longer time.
Can nutrigenomic delay aging?
Very good question, Burhan, actually. Yes, nutrigenomics can delay aging. Seeing is a little, I would say, a little controversial because delay aging, yes or not, still we don't know. But there are certain hallmarks that are given for aging. Like, how does a person age? So there are 12 hallmarks. This 12 hallmarks that are given by somebody called as Lopez-Otin. Now, these 12 hallmarks basically tell you what you are, like how you are aging. Now, aging is of two types. One is biological aging and the other is chronological aging. Now, chronological aging is nothing but you are aged. Like, for example, I was born in 2001, but on this year, 2024, I'll be 23 or 24. And somebody born back then will be so many. So you just count the number of years. Whereas biological aging is the aging that happens internally, according to the biology of the person. So this is what we are trying to tackle. We are not trying to tackle something that is chronological aging. We can't stop chronology because years are just going by. It really depends because aging, mostly they're focusing on biological aging. Now, with respect to biological aging, you have 12 different hallmarks, which is given by Lopez-Otin. So scientifically, if you say stem cell exhaustion, then mitochondrial dysfunction, then basically you have something called as telomere iteration. Now, what is telomere iteration? Our cells, they have various cell organelles. When it comes to the chromosomes, at the end, the caps which are there, they are the telomeres. Now, in the chromosome, in the telomeres, the caps of the telomeres, the end of the chromosome, if the length is shorter, that means we have aged. The aging is faster. So basically, if we see in centenarians, so basically centenarians are somebody who have lived more than 100 years. So they say it's because of the diet, such as Mediterranean diet, or few say it's because of, how their lifestyle is. So it's very, I would say, approach where you, like, there's a person called as Brian Johnson. So he has literally is working on this, like, he's crazily working on this to delay aging. So where the mitochondrial dysfunction does not occur, the length of the telomere increases, and he is like a millionaire investing into aging. What he has done is he has taken plasma from his own son, and he himself has given his plasma to his own father. And that's what they have done. So after aging, when they come to know, after plasma, they'll look little younger. But it's not always one thing. It's always a healthy lifestyle. It's also your genes to a certain extent. There are many things when it comes to aging. And also when it comes to aging, as they say, they sleep on time. The circadian rhythm is very important because your body has to detoxify, your body has to gain rest, your body has to produce new cells for which the old cells has to be excreted, and the detoxification and excretion, that the removal of the cells, only takes place when the body gets enough rest. Nowadays we don't sleep properly, our lifestyle is really unhealthy, there's no proper physical activity, we all have started having a sedentary life, no proper workouts. There are so many contributing factors to it. And even the bioactive compounds that they speak, resveratrol, which is found in wine, red grapes, you have curcumin, you have epigalactocatechins, which is present in green tea, and various flavonoids which have been under experimentation, trying to find out if which metabolic pathway can they trigger, which pathway they can reduce, or what can be done so that aging is delayed. But as we say, aging is something we all, because nobody is immortal. So yes, but there are certain things that we can do, because right now the age I am, if you check my biological age, it might be much more, because that's what happened, or it might be much less as well, because I have not exposed my body to certain things. If you expose yourself to alcohol, if you expose your body to smoking, what exactly happens? Your aging, like, speedens up, your aging just extends. And how do you get it back? There are so many people once get into healthy diet and healthy lifestyle. There's also an institute called as Hippocrates, where they stay there for few days or months, whatever. They learn something called as the clean eating concept that has come to reduce aging, reduce the food additives, the preservatives. So there are various things that occur, and due to this, they have reduced aging, in the sense the biological aging, because they're getting more better. So that's how, when it comes to nutrigenomics, because of nutrigenomics, we come to know what is the length of our telomere, or we come to know how much functional mitochondria we have, or we know what are stem cells. Basically, stem cells are cells which can turn into any cells as we want. So that stem cells reduce over time. Basically, when a child is also born, they preserve the stem cells, saying that the stem cells can be used later on. So that thing is not happening nowadays. So because of that, like, now we cannot get the stem cells which we had when we were a baby, but we have few certain stem cells which helps us to keep up with the conditions and all, the things that we fight. But that is depleting because of lifestyle, no proper diet, and various other contributing factors, even exposure to chemicals. So that is also, and that is the reason we have a lot of cancers coming up, because our body itself cannot fight, and the exposure to various toxicants is one of the things.
Very good, Alikia. Very good explanation, Alikia. Alikia, I have one question which is not related to our topic today. It's about obesity. But I think obesity also is in a way related to the neurological condition. Alikia, how do genes affect our risk for obesity?
So, as you said, how does genes? Basically, we have certain genes in the body. So, we have something called as the FTO, the fat mass and the obesity gene. We have the PPARG. We have the adiponectin gene. We have various genes if you go to see a set of genes. So, it depends on what kind of mutation you have, because these genes in the carbohydrate metabolism also. Carbohydrate metabolism is basically breaking down of the carbohydrate, storing the carbohydrate. So these genes, I have one gene with me which is responsible for breaking the carbohydrate. I have another gene with me which is responsible for taking that carbohydrate and storing the carbohydrate, extra carbohydrate in the liver, which is as glycogen, or which is stored in the muscles. But if there is a mutation, or as I said, there's a risk of developing certain variations in the gene, or there are SNPs that occur, the SNPs that we call. So if there are a risk like this, and because of the gene, there are also genes which can tell you, are you a person who frequently snacks, like you keep on eating snack because of binge eating. Do you do that, or is it because of your genetic markers that you don't have? Because few people just have 3 meals a day. Few people, they keep on eating in between, but smaller meals. So it entirely depends, if I would say your gene has a retrospective towards it or not. Coming to the gene nutrient interaction, especially when it comes to obesity, we have something called as the thrifty gene hypothesis. Now, this thrifty gene hypothesis is basically for Indians. So, what happens in thrifty gene hypothesis is, if I click a picture of my hand and if I send it to somebody, looking at that, the person won't say if I am obese or not. But if I click a picture of my entire body and if I send, the person will find out that I'm a central obesity, which is nothing but the obesity which is around the stomach or the abdomen region. So it's very prevalent in Indians, and hence we have come up with this something called as the thrifty gene hypothesis. It's because it's not like, overnight it occurs or it happens just because of a short period of time, but we have been mutated it in such a way that it's like hundreds of years ago, because of maybe no proper food habits, like because we did not have proper food then, because of drought, famine, all of these conditions. So our genes have mutated. So hence we don't gain weight like in US, America, in America and all. If they're obese, the entire body is obese. The hands are there, then the legs are there, the entire body. But as an Indian, if you see, it's only the stomach, the central obesity that is seen. So they say it's because of the thrifty gene hypothesis. So it's very different across the globe. Caucasians have a different way of looking at, the Africans have a different way, we have a different way. If you go to see the people who are maybe somebody from the East, they might not be that obese. So it's a really different approach and a different way we have to look at it.
Nice explanation, Elikia.
Thank you.
Elikia, how does nutrigenomic impact nutrient supplementation strategies?
Okay. So when it comes to nutrient supplementation strategies, I would say we have a genetic report with us, a nutrigenomic report. We know which gene is responsible for what. For example, FUT, which is responsible for the folate and all of these things. And we have MTHFR, which is responsible for, as I said, the folate metabolism. If we know that a certain gene which is responsible to do a certain thing is not working, then we know in what quantity to give, how much to give. Even in the food intolerances, we have the lactase gene, the LCT gene. So if that gene also does not function well, then we know in what ways do we give, how do we give, a certain food is incorporated into. So it's like a multifactorial approach, I would say, even when it comes to the serotonin, when it comes to the gene responsible for serotonin production, which is not present due to because of anything. There could be SNPs that could be seen, that could be any kind of variants. So if that is the case, then we know we need to supplement tryptophan, or we need to give certain nutrients that are there. So it's entirely an approach based on what deficiency you have, and is there a genetic association towards it, or how does it occur? That is the entire approach.
Very good, Alikia. Alikia, I am very glad to have you today in NutriHep broadcast. Thank you very much. And I wish you all the best in your job and your journey after graduation.
Yeah, thank you so much, Burhan. I would also say thank you for giving me this opportunity so that I can interact and, answer the questions.
You must welcome, Alikia.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for your valuable time. Thank you for watching. We will meet in another broadcast. Good night. Welcome, Alikia. Can you tell us about yourself? It's okay. Dietitian from Goa, Alikia. Link in new.
It's like three people are looking standing here. One is here, one is there.
This is the last question, and it will be done. Good, Sam.